She had crossed oceans chasing a dream of love, only to be humiliated the moment she stepped off the train. Laughter and whispers followed her every move, cruel faces turning away as if she was invisible, or worse, something to be ashamed of. Her heart sank as her would-be groom stormed away, calling her a mistake. Alone, stranded in a town that never wanted her, she was ready to give up. But just as she turned to leave, a man in dusty boots and a quiet, knowing gaze stopped her. His next decision would change both of their lives forever. Would you have stayed in that town or left after being humiliated like that? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss more stories that inspire change and challenge prejudice. She had saved for years, working in a crowded city where she was treated as less than human, just to answer a lonely farmer's letter. The promise of a new life far away from the noise and cruelty of the world kept her going. A small town, open skies, and maybe, just maybe, a family of her own. But the moment she arrived, reality hit her harder than she ever imagined. The townsfolk gathered at the small train platform, curious eyes watching as she stepped down in her best dress, clutching the letter that had brought her there. Instead of a warm welcome, she was met with cold stares. The man who had written her, who had promised her a chance at happiness, looked at her once, sneered, and tossed her letter to the ground. His rejection was loud enough for everyone to hear, and the town's cruel whispers followed, reminding her of every door that had ever been slammed in her face. She was left standing there, luggage by her side, heart pounding, unable to move. The small town was a place where everyone knew everyone, and no one looked like her. She could feel their judgment burning into her back, the quiet disapproval that told her she didn't belong here. There was no place to run, no friendly face to comfort her. Just when she was about to pick up her bags and disappear forever, she noticed one man hadn't turned away. A tall, weathered farmer leaned against a fence, his arms crossed, watching with something different in his eyes. Not pity, not disgust, but something closer to understanding. She gathered her courage and began walking away from the platform, determined to find somewhere, anywhere, to sit and think. The dusty road felt endless, the heat pressing down on her as tears stung her eyes. She had risked everything for this chance, sold nearly all she owned, and now she was stranded in a town where no one would rent her a room or even offer her a glass of water. The farmer, who had watched the scene unfold, pushed himself off the fence and followed her at a distance. He had seen too many people come through this town and leave broken. Something about the way she held her chin high, even after being humiliated, stirred something deep within him. This was a woman who deserved better than to be laughed out of town. By the time she reached the edge of the main road, she felt utterly defeated. Her dress was dusty, her throat dry, and her pride shattered. That was when she heard the crunch of boots behind her. She turned, startled, and saw the farmer standing there, hat in hand. He didn't speak, just pointed toward his wagon parked nearby. At first she hesitated. After what had just happened, how could she trust anyone here? But there was a quiet steadiness in his posture, a wordless invitation that told her he meant no harm. She climbed onto the wagon and they rode in silence. The ride stretched on, taking her far beyond the town, through golden fields and pastures, until they reached a wide stretch of farmland that seemed to go on forever. It wasn't just land. It was thriving, beautiful, and clearly cared for by someone who loved it. The farmer helped her down and gestured toward the farmhouse in the distance. As she followed him, she noticed how the workers on the land greeted him with respect. This was no ordinary farmer. This was a man who had built something extraordinary with his own hands, a man who quietly commanded authority. He led her to the porch and finally spoke, not to ask who she was or why she was there, but to tell her she was welcome. For the first time that day, her shoulders loosened, and she let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. But the peace didn't last long. News travels fast in a small town, and soon neighbors began to whisper again, this time about the farmer who had brought home the woman no one wanted. The more time she spent at the farm, the more she saw who he truly was. He was not just wealthy but deeply kind, treating his workers like family. And slowly, despite the town's gossip, she began to feel safe. Yet the pressure outside the farm grew louder. The rejected suitor who had humiliated her now began spreading lies, insisting the farmer was ruining the town's good name by keeping her there. Tension mounted, and she knew it was only a matter of time before things reached a breaking point. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. The farmer had invited her to the town's harvest festival, a bold move given the gossip that had been circling for weeks. As they arrived together, the crowd fell silent, every pair of eyes fixed on them. Some turned away, others whispered under their breath, and a few openly glared. The rejected suitor stood near the center of the square, smirking as though he had already won. The woman felt the old humiliation rise again, her hands trembling as she considered turning back. But the farmer placed a steady hand on her shoulder, guiding her forward until they stood in front of everyone. Then, in a voice that carried across the square, he addressed the crowd. He reminded them how every person in that town owed their livelihood to the harvest, to the land they worked, to the hands, no matter their color, that fed them all. He spoke of dignity, of decency, and of the courage it took to come here with nothing, searching for a better life. And then, without hesitation, he said what no one expected, that he had chosen her, that she was not a burden, not a mistake, but his future. The crowd murmured in shock. Some frowned, others stared at the ground, but a few nodded quietly, recognizing the truth in his words. The rejected suitor tried to speak, to throw another insult, but the farmer stepped forward, silencing him with a single look that made clear the conversation was over. Then he turned back to her, right there in the middle of the festival, and offered his hand. The gesture was simple, but its meaning was loud enough for the whole town to hear. She was not to be hidden away, not to be treated like a shameful secret. She was to stand beside him proudly. As she took his hand, the tension broke like a dam. Music slowly resumed, and a few people began clapping, cautiously at first, then louder, until the entire square echoed with applause. The festival became the turning point she never thought she'd get. The following days were different. Not perfect, but different. People who had once turned their backs on her now nodded in greeting. Some even stopped by the farm with quiet apologies, awkward but sincere. It seemed the farmer's words had struck something deep in the town's conscience. The same whispers that once condemned her now told a different story. Of courage, of a man who stood up for what was right, and of a woman who refused to let the world break her spirit. The farm, once just a place of refuge, became her home. She worked alongside the farmer, not as a guest, but as a partner, planting, harvesting, and learning every detail of the land. And with each passing day, she began to see her own reflection differently, not as someone unwanted, but as someone strong enough to survive rejection and still choose hope. Months later, when they stood together exchanging vows under the open sky, the entire town came. The same platform where she had been humiliated became the place where she walked toward a future she had once thought impossible. The farmer had not just given her shelter. He had given her dignity, a place where she belonged. The man who had rejected her never showed his face at the wedding. Perhaps he couldn't bear to watch the woman he had thrown away find happiness without him, but it didn't matter anymore. She no longer carried the weight of his rejection. As the music played and the town joined in celebration, she realized that her journey had never been about simply finding a husband. It had been about finding a life where she was seen, respected, and loved for who she was. And maybe that's the real question this story leaves us with. How many lives could change if we stopped judging someone's worth based on how they look and started seeing the strength it took for them to show up at all?